Maybe you're like me, you've been following the story of these NBA former players, one active player that came out in this huge federal investigation. And in fact, not too long ago, this made headlines that the NBA actually issued an urgent memo in the wake of the gambling scandal, basically reviewing and talking with players, letting them know about sports betting policies to make sure that they stay protected, and they also want fans to stay protected as well. We've heard of a few names that have come out of this, but could there be more? That is the question that I think all fans have been asking. We want to bring in Scott Burnstein to talk about this. We know that he is based in Detroit, but he's on the board for the Mob Museum in Las Vegas and also got a law degree from the University of Chicago. And Scott, to my understanding, I know you believe that this scandal will go down as history and in history as one of the biggest sports betting scandals that we've seen. Why do you believe that? And I think a lot of people are speculating more names will come out of this. What do you make of that as well?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I have no doubt that this will be the biggest sports betting scandal in American history when it's all said and done. The scope and scale of this has never been seen before. It's stretched from New York to LA for a 2 to 3 year period, almost nightly point spread manipulations between the NBA and Division I college basketball. This is the very tip of the iceberg, and we're going to be seeing a lot more names, a lot more games, a lot more institutions, because the NCAA is going to get brought into this over the next couple months, year. I don't think that this is anywhere close to being over. And just to give a timeline example, the first case in this really was from the summer of 24. So it's been about 16 months since the first case to the second case. So if it's another 16 months, that brings us, into 2027 maybe. So that's how complex and layered this thing is. And it's been two current NBA players, or one former NBA player that's now, I think, doing a jail stint, in Jonte Porter, who played for Toronto. And now Terry Rozier from the Miami Heat is the another name that's a current NBA player that's being brought in. And then two coaches so far, Chauncey Billups and Damon Jones.
I took some time, Scott, when all of this happened. I wanted to see what were the feds alleging here, who was involved, who were the players. And my first thought was, how did these, former players and current player, how did they get involved with these mob families? These are names that, when you look into it, these are serious mob families. I think I counted 4 families in total. One I remember specifically being the Gambino family. What can you tell us about the mob ties here, and how someone would get tangled up in this? To my knowledge, I don't hang out with mobsters. So how would they even be able to make those connections? Is this a situation where maybe you have a gambling problem? You come across this family and you owe them a debt, so you work for them. Like, how does that work?
Well, there were two parts of this conspiracy that we know about right now based on the case that was filed last Thursday, Operation Royal Flush. And there's a lot of moving pieces here, but I'll try to I'll simplify it. But what was being alleged in the indictment was that some of this started with fixed poker games that certain current and former pro athletes were participating in. The allegation is that Chauncey Billups, the Hall of Fame point guard, who's now the head, or was, or currently is, the head coach of the Portland Trailblazers, was drawing players, friends, contemporaries into these games that were fixed. The mob was fixing these games, these poker games. And then because these players were getting into fixed poker games, they would accrue a debt. and these were high roller games. So sometimes millions of dollars were exchanging hands in a night of high end poker. And then in order to make good on the debt, the mobsters that were behind Chauncey Billups and the guys that were drawing these players in would then lean on them and leverage the debt into, why don't you manipulate a point spread or a prop bet for us to point shave with and make money on. The other aspect of this was, the mastermind of this whole thing allegedly is a guy named Shane Hennon. He comes from Pittsburgh. He was arrested last winter and is cooperating. He had a history of staging AAU basketball events, summer youth basketball events, summer pro-am leagues, going back 20 years, where he was allegedly or potentially washing illegal proceeds through these events. And he was cultivating relationships with future NBA players, future college players from the time they were 12, 13 years old. And then when this conspiracy started, he went back and tapped a lot of these guys that he knew from helping their AAU basketball teams.
So I want to make sure I followed you there. There was a lot of good information there. So are you saying that some of these current former players, they were already doing gambling? They were already gambling on a regular basis, got caught up with the mob in some ways, and then were kind of forced to help them carry out these crimes. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's some of the allegations, yes, that they would be corralled into these fixed poker games where they were going to lose no matter what because the game was fixed. And from those fixes, they would accrue a debt. And the mob, who was the financiers of this game, of these poker games, as well as the financiers of these point shaves, would then pressure the players that were in debt to make good on the debt by manipulating a point spread or a prop bet.
Why is it that you believe, I've seen, a lot of chatter online about this too, that it is believed that it's possible that other NBA coaches could be involved in this and other NBA players, maybe some former, maybe some current. Why do you believe other names, big names that we've heard before, will come out of this?
Because right now we've only heard the names of two players that were playing in the NBA when this happened. Jonte Porter, who's pled guilty and I believe is either in the middle of doing a jail sentence or already did a jail sentence. And then Terry Rozier, who's denying all the allegations, but is a current NBA player with the Miami Heat. Those are the only two names that you've heard so far. And like I said earlier in this interview, this was something that was going on for over 2 years on a practically a nightly basis. And from coast to coast, from New York to LA and everywhere in between, and involving the NBA and Division I college basketball. So you just do the math. That's a lot more than two players.
Definitely a lot more. When I was looking at some of the court documents, there were pictures of certain things, like, for example, that table that had X-ray technology where the cards would be revealed. That was found on an iCloud account of someone. You mentioned Mr. Hennon there, who was a part of this. These people weren't in hiding. His Instagram page was open the day, it probably still is, I haven't checked, but it was open the day, still open, still posting about gambling, etc. The day when all of this came down. These people haven't been in hiding. Are you surprised by that? And typically when the mob is involved like this, a lot of the people that were mentioned in those court filings, they've had previous cases, that they've been charged for, indicted for, and they were still out. Who, in this case, the mafia sounds like they're kind of prepared for this.
Well, this is the bread and butter of the mafia. They, find a mark that they can cut into, and then they leverage, whatever exposure they can put on the player. When it comes to Shane Hennon, who, from what I'm understanding and from my reporting, was the wheel that this all spun from, and the Gambinos cultivated a relationship with Hennon out of Pittsburgh, and then that's from that is where they brought in the other crime families. And like you said, there were 4 of the 5 New York crime families involved: the Gambinos, the Lucchese's, the Bonanos, and the Genovese. I'm a little bit surprised that some of this was so out in the open. And when I say this, a simple Google search could have told you that Shane Hennon had allegations of allegations that he had cooperated in a past drug case. A simple Google search would have told you that. And it doesn't seem like any of the NBA or college players that were involved in this, or any of the mobsters that were involved in this, did any due diligence on the person that was kind of at the tip of the spear here, allegedly had a history of cooperating. So it shouldn't be shocking to people that the second that Mr. Hennon got jammed up and got pulled off a plane by the FBI on his way out of the country last January, he immediately, according to my sources, opened up and started helping them build a case. And this, what we see now, is the first shoe to drop in this case, that the mastermind of the conspiracy is helping the feds build the case. So it's like shooting fish in a barrel.
Do you think this is a situation where if you're roped and tied into, this is different families, right? But all mob ties there, that your life is on the line if you don't go with what they say?
I think that's a threat that they'll use, but in reality, the mafia in the 2020s doesn't kill people, which is why they've been able to kind of go back into the shadows over the last quarter century. There was for all intents and purposes, there was a conscious decision made by the mafia in America that they were going to dial back the violence. And because of that, because of the federal government reprioritizing and putting more emphasis on, after 9/11, foreign terrorism, in the last 10 years, 15 years, domestic terrorism, the mafia has not been top of mind. And although there are guys in the mafia that have killed people, they don't actively put murder contracts on people's heads in this day and age. But the threat and the history, the legacy, definitely helps, achieve their agenda.
I know you mentioned there, and after this, I am going to let you go. But you mentioned there, when we talk about investigations and what has happened, looking at our country from a legal perspective over the last few years, you said, the mafia may not be top of mind. Why do you think now? Why go after these groups of people now? The families, the players. Why stop it now?
Why? Because this is, like I said, this is going to end up being the biggest sports betting scandal we've ever seen. And the scope and scale of this thing is mind-numbing. And when people get the full story here and consume the entire conspiracy, they're going to be astounded at how sprawling this was. So, and then it involves professional sports and some of these, betting apps that in the league's relationship with the gambling companies. There's so much meat on this bone. You couldn't ignore it. It would be impossible to ignore it.
I had a follow-up question for you, but it escapes my mind now. I guess I'm just trying to wrap my mind around why a player would risk everything that they've amassed, especially someone like, Chauncey Billups.
Like Terry Rozier had a $100 million contract. He's making $25 million a year. I mean, I think the best way to break it down is greed, temptation, and access. And a lot of guys can play mental gymnastics with these prop bets. And for your audience that aren't bettors, a prop bet is you're not betting on the final score of the game. You're betting on a certain player's rebounds. So they'll set a number. For instance, Terry Rozier, that one of the games that he's alleged to have manipulated the point spread in, he had an over-under that he was going to get 8 rebounds. And at the halftime, he had 6 rebounds. He just pulled himself out of the game in the second half, so he couldn't get those other 2 rebounds. They can convince themselves that it's really not that big of a deal because they're not affecting the win or the loss.
Yeah, but what's crazy about that is when you look at how much money they made from their contracts,
Yeah.
these type of
Yeah.
bets were like pennies on the dollar. I do have a follow-up. This was the question I was going to ask you. I read in one case, one of these rigged games, poker games specifically, that they had essentially swindled someone out of, I think it was like $1.3 million. Any idea who some of these people that were not in on it, who they were? Who are they?
High rollers, guys that are looking for action, professional poker players, professional gamblers, and just guys with a lot of money that like the action, that are attracted to these type of games, that would normally maybe go to a casino, but for whatever reason they go to, there's a certain sex appeal and cachet to going to gamble with, pro athletes, and even if you know that the mob's involved, there's a temptation factor there to just sit there and be able to tell a story about hanging out with the mob without thinking that they're robbing you.
Yeah, yeah. I do want to ask you a follow up really quickly, and then I promise after this I'll let you go. I had heard some intel that there was a coach, a Midwest coach on the Midwest at one point, who was in on this. Name has not been mentioned, but a popular player decided to leave that team because of it. Have you heard anything about that as well?
I've heard some big names, again, in both the NBA and in college basketball. I think this is going to be bigger in the college basketball space than it is in the NBA, in the sense of how many people were point spread manipulating. And we'll know more as the months and go forward, and more cases drop within this Operation Royal Flush. But you're going to have some big names, some big college basketball programs, more NBA teams, more players. Pablo Torre just was able to break the news of Antonio Gates, the Hall of Fame NFL player, being involved in hosting one of these games. So not just the NBA, you also have now a former NFL player that's been brought into it, according to Pablo's reporting. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
And I think anyone that was playing college sports or currently playing should be definitely concerned. You have been a wealth of knowledge, and we definitely appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Go ahead.
Real quickly, just plug Original Gangsters podcast, anywhere you consume your podcast, and the Gangster Report, which is my web magazine, www.gangsterreport.com. Those are the two places that you can consume my reporting.
All right, and I'm sure you will continue reporting on this very topic.